All right, guys, we are back on YouTube. And one of the things I wrote in my book that I really loved because it's one of the pieces that I think we forget as men is that every story has its origin, right? And we love origin stories. Like everybody loves origin stories. I get asked this a million times when I get on a podcast. The origin story helps to create credibility and understand the foundation of somebody. And what I find is that when really conversing with men, there's a huge position of devaluing that origin story within them. And a lot of this comes through comparison. A lot of it comes through this over exaggeration of humbleness, I think. To some extent, there's value in that. Like, we shouldn't be braggy or trying to one up people. But when you're just talking authentically, genuinely, and naturally about where you've come from and looking at yourself in that light, there's a huge piece of valuation that comes into that. It comes into you. And so when we understand who we are as men, like where we've come from, we start to be able to understand where we want to go a lot better. And so with this means coming of respect for our own origin story. And so where did you start? That is the question I think many men fail to remember to ask themselves, and then to really sit down introspectively and say, where did I start? Now, there's spectrums to this, right? There could be the greatest upbringing in the world, a lot of money, a lot of comfort, all of these things. And then there could be the really adversity riddled upbringing and traumatic upbringing. Both have their values. And so when we look at this as men, when I say to look where you came from, is to look at it and say, what are the positive things that upbringing gave me? Instead of comparing it to others and saying, well, I wasn't taught this, I wasn't taught that, I didn't have this adversity, I didn't have this benefit, all the negative things. Instead of looking at it that way, no matter what end of the spectrum you are, whether super traumatic or whether super silver spoon-ish, ask yourselves what it is that it brought, or what is it that it brought value to you as the man you are today. And in that, you're going to find that there is a huge level of value you've been taking away from yourself when you start to remind yourself of the aspects that were positive from that gave you part of who you were today, and the way you see the world, the way you experience it, the way you influence it, and everything else. So where did you start? That is a big question. I realized that when I was writing my book, I hadn't really taken a retrospective look at my upbringing for a very long time. And in that, there was some devaluation of the man that I was today because I was forgetting the things that I came up with. And I was forgetting the great values that I was given during those times. And part of that is because of the fact that I am no longer in those seasons of life. But also part of that was the fact that I wasn't remembering all of the skills, all of the traits, all of the perceptions that were positive in who I am today that were given to me during those times. And so there was this devaluation of who I am today because of the lack of respect of what I went through, because of the lack of retrospection of what I went through, and saying that those things were good. Now, there's a huge difference between living in the past, right, which we've talked about before, but there's a huge difference between living in the past and actually looking back just to understand more of who you are and giving yourself value from those moments. And a lot of men forget to do that. The other piece to that is we start to compare, right? So like we start to compare ourselves to other people. And in that comparison, and this is what I found myself doing as well, because if we give significant value to somebody else because they're successful, because they look good, because physically they're big, or whatever we value as far as like a physical stature, right? They look the way we want to look, or they live the life we want to live, or they have the money that we want to have. whatever it is. We give them excessive value in our minds, right? And then in that, we hear their upbringing, and potentially their upbringing was very different from ours, and they weren't given a lot, or maybe they were given a lot. And we start to think like, we start to have this negotiation on why we are less than them and why we don't have those things. And then we start to forget the things that made us strong and confident in who we are, because we're comparing to these other people and saying that we aren't as good as them because they were better or they were given or had to go through more, right? So that devaluation is happening all the fucking time. Now, like I said, I experienced this in the podcast because I've met a lot of people who have either had very tumultuous upbringings with a lot of adversity and created massive amounts of success, or somebody was already given the keys to success and then they improved on that keys to success to be something very much more influential than where they would have been had they just coasted. And I started to see a lot of these things as like, well, I'm starting to devalue where I came from because of that, right? So then I started to offshore my stuff of what brought me up, and then started to just think about what I could do now to get to where they are, right? But that's not necessarily the tickets to success, especially if we want to have a life where we're authentic and feel really good and confident about who we are. What that is, because all of the things that you desire are only predicated off of happiness from if you can be happy with yourself in those moments, right? And that's why a majority of those people that they talk about as far as like celebrities and wealthy entrepreneurs and stuff like that, a lot of them experience severe unhappiness is because internally they suck, right? And so for us, it's like, okay, how can we get the internal right? And that is looking back and valuing ourselves as men, because then it doesn't matter what accomplishments are in the future or where we want to go. What matters is that every day we're living with a man that we understand, we're confident in, we are adaptable, we're able to evolve with, and we also consciously are aware of, right? And so we have to look back and say, okay, where were these pieces and how do I respect all of that value from whatever upbringing it was? And then in that, we have to ask the question, in what ways are we devaluing this in ourselves? Now, comparison is one of the pieces, but then there's the other pieces where we're just overly critical in who we are and how we were raised and the lifestyle that we came up with, or the lack of things that we had, the lack of material things that we were given in that life. And we start to devalue who we are and start to be overly critical of the negative pieces and forget about all the positive pieces, right? And this is where I find a lot of men really struggle. This is where we're great and I talk about this in my book, but we're great at playing our harshest critic. And we do that with our upbringings because of the fact that we also will want to downplay how many good things we actually gained from that upbringing and what may make us confident. Because a lot of times what happens is we feel we're average, right? We just feel that every other man has gone through the same things or worse at least, right? And so that averageness ends up percolating and causing it to permeate within the rest of the areas of our lives. So downplaying the positive nature of who we are ends up being so much easier because the fact of the expectation of everybody else being able to do it or having experienced it. But that is not true. Everything that we've come from, our origins are always unique. So understanding that if our origins are unique and what we've gone through is unique, that we are unique, and then that we have a lot of value in that uniqueness, doesn't mean you have to be cocky, and it doesn't mean that you have to go and act as if you are better than other people, but it does give you the ability to say, I'm confident and I value myself and I'm strong. So remember that in this origin story comes the strength and confidence that allows us to now also be adaptable. And you guys know that this is one of my favorite words because it's one of the best things we can do as men is to be adaptable to environments, because that's what makes people elite. And so when we recognize and respect what we've been through, we can then look to the future and consciously be aware of where we want to go. We can look to the future and start to say, hey, what is the man that I want to design now? Because as of now, we are in a position where there are some things that may not be serving us, but we understand where they came from and we understand the value in them, but they may not be moving forward with us in the new seasons to come. And in that, valuing our past or valuing how we were given these things or our upbringings, we start to have this start to have this separation where we're able to say, okay, I acknowledge you and I respect you and I value you. And then now how do I move forward and take that and either run with it or shed that and incorporate something new? And that's what's really important, right? Because like I've said before, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you're from. And this just gives us the method of saying, I can actually understand where I came from, so I know how to get where I want to go. And I know how to do that through awareness and consciousness and developing strong pieces that improve the place that I'm going to today as a man. So every origin has its story. Value your story, and then utilize those values to understand where you want to go in life as a man and as just a human being, whatever goals you have. But make sure that you understand and value that so you can also have a proper separation if that needs to be had. That is all I got for you guys today. This is a piece that I talk about in my book, Design the Man Within. And if you haven't purchased it, if you haven't read it, make sure you go on to Amazon or go to designthemanwithin.com, purchase the book, get it for yourself, do yourself a favor. It's a way that you can start to work on these tools and harness and grow and be a better person in the world, be a more intentional man without breaking the bank. It's a fucking book, guys. Go ahead, and there's work in there that helps you to work through the process to develop who the man is that you are and who you desire to be. All right, everybody. I'll see y'all next time.